happens when a small smuggling crew convinced of its speed and secrecy suddenly finds itself hunted by a machine that combines satellites, radars, and helicopters into one relentless chain of pursuit. At 10 o'clock in the morning, a go-fast boat pushing close to 50 knots sliced through the eastern Pacific. To the 5 men on board, it felt like routine, same route, same boat, same risks they had gambled on before. But above them at more than 20,000 feet, US surveillance aircraft were already watching, calculating, and waiting for physics to play its inevitable role. In that moment, a $42 million smuggling run began its final chapter, not with explosions, but with precision and control. The opening stages of the chase reveal a broader truth. Maritime interdictions are not isolated incidents, but reflections of the larger security landscape. In 2025, when US forces are also dealing with Russia's expanded naval operations in the Black Sea, Iran's use of drones against Israeli shipping, and China's growing assertiveness in the South China Sea, every smuggler caught is more than a criminal statistic. It's a demonstration that American maritime power under the Trump administration extends far beyond open confrontation. It reaches into the daily logistics of illicit trade that often funds armed groups and destabilizes regions. Detection began with the HC-130J Hercules, a workhorse aircraft equipped with state-of-the-art radars and infrared cameras. These systems spotted the boat as a tiny contact moving far too quickly for a fishing vessel with no AIS automatic identification system broadcast and cruising along shipping lanes it had no business being in. 3 red flags raised in seconds. Soon after, the electro-optical turret confirmed what the radars had predicted, a low-slung boat tarps covering its cargo hold, churning the sea in straight defiance of maritime law. From that point forward, the operation was less about pursuit and more about inevitability. Tactical data links relayed every movement to a Coast Guard cutter on the horizon and into a joint task force command hub. The hunters already knew their prey's trajectory. The smuggling boat was predictable, fast, yes, but locked into geography, fuel constraints, and the mathematics of interception. Experts in maritime security often compare such interdictions to a chess match where one side sees the entire board and the other moves blindly. Dr. James Stavridis, retired NATO Supreme Allied Commander, recently noted in an interview that cartels underestimate the precision of US surveillance networks. They think in terms of speed and luck, while the US brings geometry, timing, and overwhelming coordination. His words resonate here. Every degree of turn, every knot of speed was being plotted, and the outcome was already written long before the smugglers realized it. Yet the significance stretches beyond one interdiction. NATO analysts point out that cartels' smuggling routes often overlap with those used for arms trafficking, and sometimes even with covert maritime supply to proxy groups. Western intelligence agencies have long tracked how profits from narcotics fuel instability as far afield as the Middle East. In 2025, as Israel and Iran exchange strikes over shipping in the Gulf of Oman, Washington cannot afford to ignore the link between smuggling networks and wider geopolitical risks. Every captured boat denies resources not just to cartels, but potentially to state-aligned actors seeking to exploit them. For the men aboard, however, such strategy was invisible. Their reality was salt spray roaring engines and a conviction that speed could outpace authority. What they could not see was the MH-65 helicopter already lifting off from the cutter, a predator designed precisely for this scenario. The sea has no borders, but it has limits, and for a crew running on borrowed fuel and borrowed time, those limits were closing fast. This opening encounter serves as a chilling reminder in today's interconnected battle space. A smuggling boat in the Pacific is not just a local crime. It is part of a global pattern of movement, money, and weapons. Each interdiction reverberates across continents, tightening the net on cartels, while sending a signal to rivals abroad from Moscow to Tehran to Beijing that US dominance at sea is far from eroding. So here's the question for viewers: if even small cartels can be stopped by such overwhelming precision, how does this same network of sensors and interceptors reshape the balance of power against state adversaries like Russia, Iran, or China? The answer may be more unsettling than the smugglers ever imagined. What allows a single radar blip in the middle of the Pacific to transform into a full-scale interdiction, ending with a disabled boat and arrested crew? The answer lies in the layers of detection and tracking technology that knit together the modern American maritime shield. Once the HC-130J Hercules detected the suspicious craft, the cascade of surveillance began not just with one aircraft, but with a network designed to leave smugglers with nowhere to hide. The first step was geometry. Analysts calculated the go-fast boat's speed direction and likely fuel endurance. At 50 knots, fuel is burned at a punishing rate. Smugglers rely on motherships or coastal rendezvous points to sustain these runs. Each mile, however, brings them into narrower corridors of possibility. US operators, drawing on both classified algorithms and open-source predictive modeling, built an intercept plan that mapped out every probable turn, every potential escape vector. It's like watching someone run through a maze where all exits are already blocked, one Coast Guard commander told Defense News earlier this year. But detection in 2025 also means integration. Satellite feeds, unmanned aerial systems, and naval radars fuse into a single tactical picture. When the Hercules spotted the target, information did not stay confined to its crew. It traveled instantly via secure data links to cutters, helicopters, and even allied assets monitoring the same region. NATO's maritime coordination centers, originally built to counter Russian submarines, now provide real-time intelligence that also aids in counter-cartel missions. As a result, the smugglers were not just fleeing one plane, but an invisible web spanning hundreds of miles. The go-fast boat itself told a story. With tarps strapped over the aft deck and its sharp low profile, it was optimized for evasion, but its very design raised red flags: no fishing equipment, no legitimate cargo, no transponder. The vessel's radar cross-section, smaller than many pleasure crafts, still betrayed its presence because of its unusual speed and course. Algorithms flagged it instantly as high risk, a pattern refined over decades of interdictions. This interplay between detection and certainty reflects a wider shift in naval operations. Just as NATO has improved its ability to track Russian missile launches in the Black Sea, the US has optimized its sensors to detect the subtler signatures of smuggling craft. Both missions rely on the same principle, finding the anomaly in a sea of normal activity. Dr. Sarah Kirchberger, a maritime security expert cited by DW, explains that modern conflict and crime both exploit gray zones, areas where legitimacy is blurred. The key to control is rapid recognition of patterns. As data flowed, the Coast Guard cutter prepared to deploy its helicopter. The interception plan was straightforward: use the aircraft's speed and maneuverability to close the distance, issue warnings, and if necessary, disable the engines. But before steel and bullets entered the equation, it was math and sensors that had already dictated the outcome. The smugglers could not outpace the radar horizon, nor could they erase their digital footprint from the network of surveillance. Beyond the tactical level, these operations carry strategic weight. Smuggling routes across the Pacific are not only conduits for narcotics. Intelligence assessments suggest overlaps with illegal arms shipments destined for Central America, where instability often bleeds into US domestic security concerns. In a year where the Trump administration has pushed NATO to expand its maritime patrols, such interdictions also serve as proof points. Allies see the US not only defending Europe's eastern flank, but simultaneously managing transnational threats closer to home. From the smuggler's perspective, the cat-and-mouse game had turned into a trap. What looked like open water was in reality a monitored battle space. Every mile they advanced, the net tightened, reducing their options to either compliance or confrontation. And as the helicopter's rotors thundered into action, the balance of power shifted irreversibly. So the question arises, if a smuggling crew cannot outrun or outwit such networks, what chance do larger state navies relying on stealth or surprise really have in a world where detection is nearly instant and data sharing erases the fog of war? What happens when raw speed on the water meets precision from the sky? As the Coast Guard's MH-65 helicopter lifted from the cutter's deck, the smuggling crew suddenly faced a hunter that could outmaneuver them in every dimension. Unlike boats, which are confined to the plane of the sea, helicopters can cut across arcs, intercept future points, and dictate the geometry of pursuit. In the balance of physics, the smuggler's confidence began to unravel. The MH-65, tailored for interdiction, carried more than just rotors and pilots. Equipped with loudspeakers, visible warning lights, and weapon mounts designed for engine-disabling fire, it was both a messenger and an enforcer. The helicopter descended into an altitude where its downwash turned the smuggler's deck into a wind tunnel spray boiling over the stern. Through amplified broadcast, orders were given clearly: stop, prepare to be boarded, comply. The commands were repeated in both Spanish and English, removing any doubt about what was required. But compliance never came. 15 minutes of escalation unfolded verbal orders, visible flares, even warning shots into the water ahead of the boat. These steps followed strict US rules of engagement, proportional, deliberate, designed to minimize harm. Yet the smugglers pressed on, perhaps believing a mothership awaited them over the horizon, perhaps convinced the helicopter would hesitate to fire. Their gamble collided with the discipline of US forces. Once defiance was clear, the mission shifted to precision disabling. Marksmen aboard the helicopter, trained through endless simulations in storm and night conditions, took their positions. Unlike combat, this was not about destruction. It was about surgical accuracy, putting bullets exactly where they mattered into the engines that powered escape. Within seconds, the distinctive roar of the boat's quad outboards was silenced one by one, replaced by the sputtering of failing machinery. In moments, the vessel slowed, its aura of invincibility dissolved. The process was a testament to training. Coast Guard, Hatrin helicopter interdiction tactical squadron operators rehearse these scenarios relentlessly, knowing that hesitation or error can mean either lost suspects or unnecessary bloodshed. Precision fire against moving targets in open water is one of the most demanding tasks in maritime operations, noted retired US Navy SEAL Commander Mark Devine in a recent panel. It requires not only skill, but the kind of discipline that only years of practice can instill. Strategically, these tactics echo broader trends. As NATO forces adapt to drone swarms over Ukraine and anti-ship missiles in the Baltic, the principle remains the same: disable capability, not annihilate life. By targeting engines instead of people, interdiction forces preserve evidence, secure arrests, and demonstrate restraint, all while maintaining overwhelming control. In an era when US rivals criticize Western forces for excessive use of power, these operations showcase a different model: decisive, precise, and lawful. From a geopolitical lens, the implications are sharp. Smuggling interdictions may appear small compared to carrier groups facing off in the South China Sea or missile exchanges between Israel and Iran, but they serve as proof of concept. If US helicopters can disable engines on a boat in seconds, what message does that send to adversaries relying on fast attack craft or uncrewed surface vessels in contested waters? The technology and discipline on display here ripple into strategic deterrence, reinforcing Washington's credibility in multiple theaters. For the 5 men aboard the smuggling craft, however, the world shrank rapidly. Where once they believed in speed, now they sat exposed engines, silent spray fading into still water. Above them hovered the embodiment of modern interdiction, a machine that combined surveillance firepower and legality into one decisive outcome. The audience must ask if a helicopter and a handful of trained operators can dismantle a multi-million-dollar operation within minutes. How might this same doctrine scale in a confrontation with state actors deploying swarms of vessels or drones across critical choke points like the Taiwan Strait or the Persian Gulf? What does it look like when overwhelming force transitions into total control within seconds? Once the smugglers' engines were disabled, the interdiction team moved with clinical precision. Rifles leveled, suspects ordered forward hands, raised eyes down. The choreography drilled into Coast Guard boarding units thousands of times unfolded seamlessly. The men aboard, who minutes earlier had defied every warning, now found themselves immobilized under the authority of operators whose muscle memory had been shaped by years of live-fire rehearsals in night storm and combat conditions. This phase was not about bravado, it was about preserving life and preserving evidence. Maritime law demands that contraband cargo and even the boat itself be documented meticulously. Photographs, video logs, chain of custody records, and body camera footage ensured that every ounce of narcotics, every fuel log, every GPS tracker could be admissible in court. A single missing link in the evidentiary chain could collapse the case, allowing criminals to walk free. For that reason, interdiction crews worked as much like forensic teams as combat units. Sinking the vessel was never an option. Destroying evidence would not only weaken prosecutions, but also risk environmental damage, an outcome the US could ill afford in already fragile international waters. Smugglers often try to scuttle their boats to erase proof, yet Coast Guard units, trained specifically to prevent this, arriving fast, securing suspects and stabilizing the craft before it can be destroyed. Every package of contraband is weighed, sampled, sealed, and logged. Even details like the engine brand, hull markings, and navigation equipment are tagged for intelligence exploitation. Beyond the courtroom, the operation had deeper resonance. Strategically, each interdiction deprives cartels of resources and disrupts supply chains that stretch across hemispheres. Intelligence gathered from a single boat phone numbers stored on GPS units, routes plotted on maps, or markings on contraband packaging can lead to raids in Central America, arrests in Europe, or financial investigations in the US. In a world where Russian networks are accused of using smuggling profits to finance mercenary operations and Iranian groups fund regional proxies through illicit trade, the relevance of such seizures becomes geopolitical. Western analysts emphasize this ripple effect. Professor Bruce Hoffman of Georgetown University noted in The Guardian that logistics nodes are the Achilles heel of transnational networks. Disrupt them repeatedly, and you force adversaries into costlier, riskier operations that erode their long-term viability. The principle applies not only to narcotics cartels, but also to hostile states supplying arms through covert maritime routes. The human element, however, could not be ignored. Many of those captured in such operations are not cartel kingpins, but low-level recruits, young men promised quick cash or coerced under threat of violence to their families. For Coast Guard operators, this reality shapes their conduct. Humane treatment, medical aid when needed, and a focus on arrest rather than destruction distinguish these missions from raw combat. Under President Trump's administration, the emphasis remains on decisive interdiction, coupled with strict adherence to legal norms ensuring that the United States cannot be accused of waging unrestrained violence on the seas. As the suspects were secured and the evidence logged, the adrenaline of the helicopter disabling gave way to the slow, deliberate process of prosecution building. What seemed cinematic from a distance, engines exploding, rotors thundering, was in reality an operation meticulously engineered to end not in chaos but in courtroom conviction. Here lies the deeper lesson. Interdiction is not about single victories at sea. It is about shaping an environment where smuggling becomes harder, costlier, and less predictable. By combining tactical precision with legal rigor, U.S. forces demonstrate that they can dismantle threats without igniting uncontrolled conflict. So the question must be asked, if the United States can impose this level of control and documentation on a cartel boat, how might similar methods be adapted to track, disable, and prosecute state-backed actors conducting gray zone maritime warfare in contested regions like the South China Sea or the Black Sea? What ripple effect does one interdiction have on a vast criminal empire? At first glance, seizing a single go-fast boat might appear minor compared to the tonnage trafficked globally. Yet strategically, every interdiction is a strike at the logistical arteries that keep cartels alive. When engines are shot out and crews captured, it is not only contraband that is lost, it is time, money, trust, and operational certainty. Cartels depend on predictable supply chains. A disrupted route means fuel wasted, safe houses compromised, and crews detained. Over time, these disruptions bleed cartels of resources, forcing them into riskier, less efficient operations. Smugglers must invest in replacement boats, hire new crews, and reroute shipments through longer, more hazardous passages. Each shift increases their exposure to surveillance and multiplies costs. According to U.S. Southern Command estimates cited by Reuters in mid-2025, interdictions in the Eastern Pacific have pushed some smuggling costs up by nearly 30% compared to 5 years ago. The psychological toll is just as damaging. Crews swap stories of helicopters disabling engines in seconds, of colleagues arrested and sentenced to decades in prison, of operations collapsing before they even reached shore. This atmosphere of fear erodes recruitment pipelines as fewer are willing to gamble their lives for uncertain payoffs. In the words of retired Coast Guard Vice Admiral Charles Michel, quoted in Defense News, "You don't just take out a boat, you take out confidence, and confidence is currency in these networks." These tactical outcomes feed directly into larger geopolitical contests. Smuggling profits are not contained within Latin America. They launder into offshore accounts, real estate in Europe, and in some cases, covert weapons purchases that ripple into conflicts abroad. Western intelligence agencies have long suspected overlaps between cartel logistics and arms trafficking networks tied to hostile states. In 2025, as Russia strains under sanctions and relies increasingly on shadow fleets to move resources, NATO officials privately acknowledge parallels. Both cartels and sanctioned states use complex maritime webs vulnerable to interdiction. The disruption also carries deterrent value. When allies witness the efficiency of US interdictions, they gain confidence in the credibility of American commitments elsewhere. A German naval officer quoted by DW noted, "Every interdiction is a signal. If the US can deny freedom of movement to smugglers in the Pacific, it can deny the same to adversaries in the Baltic or Mediterranean. This perception bolsters NATO cohesion at a time when collective maritime security is under unprecedented pressure from Russian and Chinese assertiveness." From a broader security standpoint, the Trump administration has emphasized such operations as evidence that America can protect its homeland while projecting stability abroad. The White House has linked cartel interdictions to domestic security, arguing that denying drugs and smuggling revenues undercuts not only criminal violence in Central America, but also the financial pipelines of hostile actors. In an era when Israel and Iran exchange missile fire over shipping lanes, and when China tests US resolve with aggressive patrols near Taiwan, these maritime victories, though small in scale, form part of a wider tapestry of deterrence. For the 5 men aboard the interdicted boat, none of this mattered. Their world collapsed in seconds, their dreams of easy profit replaced by shackles and courtrooms. But for Washington, NATO, and America's adversaries, the lesson was unmistakable. The US has fused technology, training, and law into a machine that not only seizes contraband, but reshapes the strategic balance. So the key question becomes, if interdictions can steadily degrade cartels and undermine their confidence, could the same methods of relentless disruption and uncertainty prove equally effective against state adversaries waging hybrid warfare